people who suddenly find themselves in a different era. Aircraft that vanish to reappear minutes, hours, or decades later. Places where time itself seems to crack and twist. Come with me on a strange journey as I look at first-hand accounts, some famous, some little known, but all strange and puzzling, and reveal the theories that show that time and reality isn't what we think it is. Do these stories prove that time slips are a real phenomenon? You decide. The drive from Scotland to northeast England can be bleak, passing over remote, often mist-shrouded hills and moorland, interspersed with stretches of dense forest. The mother of a family making that journey some years ago tells a strange story. It was a foul day, raining heavily. Her young children were hungry, the parents themselves tired and needing a break. Suddenly, they spot a sign. Food, 1 mile, next right. Following the small lane the sign points to, they arrive at a grand and imposing country house, light blazing from its windows, but no signs of other visitors. Entering, they're welcomed by a very formally dressed waiter who seems surprised at their appearance, but ushers them to a grand room lit by chandeliers and with many tables set with silverware on starched linen tablecloths, almost as if for a banquet. Yet, there are no other diners. The food they're served is delicious, but the mother's unease is growing. The oddly formal waiter neither smiles nor engages with them. And out of the window, she notices nurses in white uniforms pushing what seem to be patients onto a nearby terrace. They finish eating and leave as soon as they can, but the oddness of the place stays with them. Making the same journey some months later, out of curiosity, they decide to seek the strange house out again, only to find flattened, overgrown foundations that appear to have been untouched for years. A ghost story? Or an experience of a time slip? A collision of two eras where people seem to slip into a different reality, the same place but a completely different time. A deserted restaurant in the countryside isn't unusual, and it's possible, though unlikely, that the house had been demolished in the few months between their visits. Or were they mistaken, visiting a different place the second time round? Again, it's possible. But what about the nurses and the fact they were pushing patients outside in a rainstorm? Many such grand houses in the area were used as convalescent homes, especially during the First World War. Were they experiencing some sort of living flashback, dining in a place that no longer existed, seeing events that actually occurred many years earlier? These stories are much more common than most people would believe, and can happen even in places you know well. One day, a young American is driving to work on the route he'd followed for over a year. It's a 30-minute early morning drive from his home to his place of work in Washington County, Pennsylvania. But he routinely leaves more than an hour for the journey. On this particular morning, there's a heavy fog. So heavy, the road signs are invisible. But it's no big deal. He's on a toll road, and the exit to his destination is the first exit after the toll booth. Only something strange happens. On taking that exit, he comes not to his usual destination, but a town he's never seen before. It seems empty and old. There are no vehicles at all, no people around, none of the street furniture you'd find in a modern town, not even paved roads. Making a quick about turn, he heads back to the highway, finding the next exit takes him to his destination. Only, despite his detour taking only a few minutes, the half-hour drive has taken an hour and a half. And next time he drives the route, in clear weather, there is no exit leading to the strange town. Though he searches the area all around, he never finds it again. During the 1980s, a British woman named Caroline Anders moved to the county of Devon in the far southwest of England. On her first visit to the nearby city of Plymouth, she's struck by the beauty of an old church at a road junction. The windows were full of colour from the light streaming through the stained glass, and as we passed the front doors, I saw a large congregation. Caroline thinks no more of it until a few weeks later she drives that way again and is horrified to see the church in ruins. Asking her passenger, a local man, what had happened, she's in for a shock. He explains that the church, known as Charles Church, was bombed during World War II and has been a ruin left as a memorial for the dead ever since. Caroline was a level-headed medical worker, not given to flights of fancy. Yet she is still convinced of what she saw. Over the years, I've collected dozens of stories like these from people all over the world who are sure they've experienced what they say, and many want to remain anonymous for fear of ridicule. Often the stories have similarities. A fog or haze is often mentioned, a strange, thick feeling in the air. Sometimes far more time has passed than the witness realises, sometimes much less. Many such events happen at places where extreme emotions have been felt, the site of the bombed church, the place where perhaps soldiers recovered from war or died of their injuries. Is there perhaps some psychic trace which, under certain conditions, can be relived? An account from southwest Germany links many of those features. A young girl, just 5 or 6 years old, remembers being on her grandparents' farm, helping to bring in the harvest. As kids will, she decides to sneak off and explore one of the woods that dots the huge property, something that's strictly forbidden by her elders. Still in earshot of the field where the harvesting continues, she notices a strange haze rising from the ground, and suddenly, the everyday sounds around her, the birds in the trees, the harvester, the voices of her family, all fade away. Though the day is still bright and sunny, there is no sound at all, like a complete vacuum. Young as she is, the girl feels something odd, different. Suddenly, in front of her, looms an old military tank, shattered and rust-covered, half sunken into the forest floor, its gun barrel twisted and hanging loose. At one time, such relics of World War II were a common sight in the area, but something about it scares the girl, enough to send her running back, bursting out of the trees to find her hysterical family combing the farm in search of her. Though it seems to her that she's been away for 10 minutes at most, her family say she's been gone over 3 hours. They have even searched the woodland from which the girl has just run. Taking her grandfather's hand, she leads him back to show him the destroyed tank, but there is nothing there. Many accounts of these sorts of time slips do involve children. Perhaps their minds are more attuned, more accepting of the seemingly impossible. One such tale happened in the English county of Norfolk during the 1970s. A family with 2 young children were staying with an elderly great-aunt in a house dating back to the 1600s. Eager to start having fun on the first day of their holiday, the 2 children are up long before anyone else. Or so they think. Bursting into the small old-fashioned parlour, they're surprised to find a fire already burning in the ancient hearth, and sitting beside it, an old woman dressed in clothes which seem very dated. Even more surprisingly, she was working an old-fashioned spinning wheel. As they enter, she looks up, but doesn't speak. Thinking she must be the housekeeper who comes in to look after their great-aunt, the children run off to play. But when they return soon after, not only has the old lady disappeared, but the fire is unlit and the hearth cold. Confused, the children wake the adults, who say the housekeeper isn't due for hours yet. Were they imagining it all? A children's game that began to seem real? Some critics dismiss all such stories as hallucinations, even dreams. Or had time somehow rolled back to allow the children a glimpse of the same place in a different era? Some scientists think it could be possible. that there are many realities, many times existing side by side? Could the barriers between them sometimes crack and open, allowing us to pass through? If so, how? The UK seems to have a large number of time slip cases, perhaps, say some theories, because it has so many old buildings. If a place has been lived in continuously for 600, 800, or even 1,000 years, there are so many different lives, different realities, perhaps echoes of the past, even time itself, getting somehow caught there. But bizarrely, the one place in the UK that seems to experience most time slips is very different. This busy, modern shopping street in the heart of Liverpool, the city that was the birthplace of the Beatles. One of the most famous tales from Bold Street concerns an off-duty policeman named Frank, who in July 1996 was shopping in the city centre. He'd arranged to meet his wife in a bookshop, and after picking up what he needs, he heads in that direction. Only suddenly, he notices the street around him has changed. The vehicles look like they come from the 1950s. The people bustling past are dressed in clothes of a similar era. Even odder, the bookshop he was supposed to be meeting his wife at has hats and clothes in the window, and a different name above the door, Cribs. Confused, he enters the shop, only to find everything as it should be and his wife waiting. As quickly as the strange experience began, it ends. This story has been told often, but I've heard many more from the same area. A thief who somehow ends up in 1969, a young mother who goes shopping at what she thinks is a newly opened baby shop, to find out later that it was a business that had been there years previously, a woman who gets a tattoo from a newly opened shop, only for it to mysteriously fade within days. Going back to the shop, she finds it derelict, obviously not used for years. I could do a whole video just on the stories from that one street, and I maybe will, but why are there so many incidents from such a small area? Is there a force at work that might make it easier for different eras to collide and mix? One suggestion revolves around Liverpool's underground railway station, almost as old as London's famous tube system, and runs on high-voltage electricity for the last 100 years. The subterranean tunnels form a loop right around the area where so many time slips have been reported. But such events only seem to have been happening since the underground system was electrified. Electromagnetic fields produced by strong currents of electricity have strange properties, and since the days of Albert Einstein, scientists have theorized that such fields could, perhaps, make time flow differently, maybe even help break down the barriers that separate our now from the many other nows that have occurred in the same place throughout history. Such energy fields might also help to explain our next stories. In the early 1970s, a routine National Airlines flight into Miami International Airport suddenly drops off radar screens. The weather is poor, and fearing the worst, air traffic controllers immediately trigger emergency procedures and ask other flights in the area to report anything unusual. But there are no signs of a crash or an explosion in the sky. With search teams already scrambling, suddenly, 10 minutes after the plane vanished, its blip reappears on the radar screens. Seconds later, Miami Control receive a call from the pilot of the missing plane, a completely routine transmission advising them he is beginning final approach to the airport. Fearing that the crew might have deliberately shut off the aircraft's radar transponder to alert them to a hijack situation or other emergency that they could not report verbally, controllers direct them to land as normal, but then taxi to a deserted corner of the field where the airliner is surrounded by security staff, only for the control tower to receive a puzzled message from the captain asking what's happening. Because, as far as the passengers and crew were concerned, nothing at all unusual had occurred. They reported a completely normal flight with no loss of contact. On examination, though, all the watches and clocks on board are found to be 10 minutes slow. Could a freak electromagnetic field from the atmosphere or the plane itself have sent the plane on a different path through time, without those on board even being aware of it? The story also has a strange follow-up. Just a few years later, on May the 8th, 1978, an identical National Airlines 727, flying from Miami International in poor weather once again, vanished from radar screens. This time, it had crashed due to communication errors between pilots and ground controllers. Could there have been a link, a ripple through time, somehow connecting the two events? There are many similarities between these stories and disappearances in areas such as the Bermuda Triangle, sudden strange weather patterns, electrical storms. One often heard tale is that of Santiago Airlines Flight 513, which is said to have vanished in 1954, only to land safely in 1989, 35 years later. Though the plane landed safely, the same can't be said of the passengers and crew, who were mere skeletons. There's no evidence that this is true, but there is perhaps a grain of truth somewhere in the story of another mysteriously delayed aircraft that seemed to have slipped through time. Perhaps these sorts of events even hold the key to many unsolved vanishings, such as that of MH370. Maybe one day that lost flight too will reappear, with those on board unaware that anything unusual has occurred. Most of the time slips that are reported involve people from our time glimpsing the past, though a few also seem to have glimpsed future events. But if the phenomenon is real, shouldn't there be stories of people from the future suddenly appearing here and now? Perhaps there are, but we see them as something different. Throughout history and across every culture, there have been reports of shadow people, sometimes called the Dijin, shadowy instinct patches, perhaps glimpsed from the corner of your eye, that seem somehow alive. Mostly these encounters are benign. Sometimes they bring a feeling of unease, a malevolence, but rarely is there any interaction between these shadowy figures and those witnessing them. Could these be time slips from the future? Because they haven't yet existed in our time, perhaps all we can see is a vague, shadowy something. Perhaps it's what the people in the stories I've recounted look like to those who they see in the past. Maybe the old lady in the Norfolk cottage saw only a door blown open by the wind and a patch of shadow crossing the room. Perhaps many things we put down to ghosts, spirits, or demons are just time slips from a future world or worlds. Take a look out of the corner of your eye. Just be sure there's not a shadow watching you right now. One more odd occurrence led to a theory that might explain time slips and many other such phenomenon. The Neonian Baptistry in Ravenna is one of the world's most celebrated buildings, close to the mausoleum of Galla Placidia, daughter of the Roman Emperor Theodosius the Great. In the early 1930s, a man is visiting both monuments with a friend. He's been before and knew both buildings well. On entering the baptistery, they are both aware of an odd luminescence or haze, a mild blue light that filled the room. Even more, they are struck by the beauty of 4 mosaics that the man hadn't noticed on his previous visit. As tourists do, he decides to buy photographs of the mosaics, but oddly, he can't find any for sale. Still, the vision of them wouldn't leave him. So impressed was he that even years later he could see every detail before my eyes. And on hearing an acquaintance was planning to visit the baptistery himself, asks if he would find and buy some images to bring back. After his visit, though, the acquaintance returns empty-handed, and what he says shocks the man deeply. There were no photographs, because there were no such mosaics in the building, nor, according to guides, had there ever been. Both the man and his companion on the trip remember the mosaics in extraordinary detail. She long refused to believe that what she had seen with her own eyes had not existed, and neither could offer an explanation. The man called it one of the most curious events of his life. Had the pair momentarily slipped back to see the baptistery as it had been in a far distant past? An odd tale, but it would be no more remarkable than the other experiences I've related, if not for the identity of the man who had the experience. His name was Dr. Carl Jung. If you've watched my other videos, you'll know he's a name that's appeared often, the so-called father of analytical psychology. Many of his theories offer intriguing solutions to many seemingly unexplained events. His experience in the Neonian baptistery was one of the sparks to lead to his theory that there is a collective unconscious which all humans share. In the mausoleum of Galla Placidia, he explained he felt an odd connection with the dead woman, and it was as if he saw what she might have seen that day. So are people who experience time slips seeing memories made by other long-dead people? Perhaps such events can be triggered in many ways, but all give a glimpse beyond what we understand as reality, into a stranger, darker, and sometimes more frightening world, from which some may not return. Thank you to all of those whose accounts and stories I've used, and if you'd like to hear more such stories, or have had a similar experience of your own, please share it in the comments. Check out these videos for more strange tales of the unconscious mind, and be sure to like and subscribe to see my latest videos first. Thanks for watching.